My name is Kenneth Auden, and I'll be your Master of Ceremonies for today. Mr. Thomas Beck of the Howland Group Incorporated will be our moderator. Mr. Beck is the Senior Vice President of the Howland Group. He's involved in the emerging smart container market as well as high-value, time-sensitive cargo transport, and directly supported overseas efforts to develop the Caucasus Transit Corridor to improve cargo flows throughout Central Asia. Mr. Beck has often highlighted the potential impact of improving information exchange and reducing transit times on local, regional, and global trade flows. He has worked with senior leadership of both large and small organizations, providing new insights to their organizations and/or business environment, often reframing critical issues, allowing for creative and effective problem solving. Mr. Beck has an MBA from Cornell University as well as an MS and BA in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania. In respect to our presenters and courtesy to fellow attendees, I request you silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate. Mr. Beck, the floor is yours.
Is this on? First of all, thank you, Casey. All of us should give him a quick hand. I know from personal experience that he sends emails at 1 o'clock in the morning, it follows up at 3, it follows up at 6, follows up at 4. So I want you all to give him a round of applause and thank him. So this is the last panel for the day. The idea here, I didn't know it was going to be quite so intimate, but the idea here is to have a little bit of a conversation as opposed to a series of presentations and things of that nature. And I want to take just a quick minute to introduce my fellow panelists. I think we got a pretty good group here. First, we have from Allison, here's Roman, and where are the slides? Can anybody see anything slide-wise?
I guess we can see the slides on the podium.
You can see. It's on the
Oh, I see. Thank you. There we go. There we are. All right, so of course I can read those perfectly. So we have Roman here from Allosense. Allosense is a dual-use technology startup located in San Antonio, manufacturers of AI-enabled smart sensors and measurement systems. Then we have Neil Furukawa of Akua, provider of end-to-end tracking and monitoring, transforming sensor data into actionable information. We have Netfisa here. We've got Ian Walter, pioneer of wireless communication systems for multiple industries, with a specialty in machine learning and end-to-end supply chain visibility. And I'm with the Howland Group, which is a family-owned business. And I'll give a little bit of an introduction, then I'll let each one of you speak on behalf of your organizations, and then we'll kick it off, okay? So the Howland Group's family-owned, been around for about 35 years. We've been longtime proponents and advocates of the U.S. maritime industry. We've been involved in next-generation ship design. We've been involved in state-of-the-art shipbuilding, smart ports, and smart containers. We've invested in and launched with the Department of Defense the first U.S. seaport community to provide visibility and security for DoD supply chains and distribution network. We're currently focused on the rapidly growing smart container market. And we recently invested and teamed with RedGuard, Steve Pett's here, RedGuard, Akua, U.S. Steel, Hutchinson Equipment Services to form the U.S. Smart Container Coalition to develop from mine to the digital solution, the first U.S. smart container. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roman to give a quick update for him.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roman Sandoval. I'm the founder and CEO of Allosense Incorporated. What Tom had mentioned, we are a dual-use technology startup that's focused in making AI-enabled sensors and measurement solutions. Tom, if you could actually go to that slide, I could talk a little bit more about that as well. I think it's the next slide. We began in 2020, and our main industry that we work in is in the electric vehicle battery manufacturing space. And so what we're doing is we're taking some of the capabilities in optimizing the manufacturing, the next-gen manufacturing, and applying those capabilities, those technologies, into other domains, one of which is the maritime space, tracking, logistics, things of that sort. And even though we started in 2020, I've been involved in engineering for more than 15 plus years. When we think about smart containers, I think about some of the companies I worked with in the past, which includes Apple on the iPhone. So when Steve Jobs was presenting the iPhone 3, 4, and 5, I was there in Foxconn in China making some of those radios for the iPhones. In regards to like smart containers, I think about Tesla Model 3s. I was actually in the Gigafactory as well, working to ramp the manufacturing of the vehicles there. And so what we're doing is we're taking some of the capabilities in the manufacturing space, the sensors, to optimize manufacturing and applying it to smart container technologies and use cases. Happy to be here. Thanks again for being in this last session, and I'll pass it over to Neil.
Good afternoon. My name is Neil Furukawa, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Akua. We're a little bit older than Allosense. I founded the company in 2017. My background is I spent many years, probably over 25 years, working on the technology development around asset tracking, telematics, covert sensors, I mean, you name it. One of the things that we focused on, primarily on asset tracking, is we developed the active RFID system that was adopted by the United States Department of Defense to track all the military assets globally. So about 7 years ago, I started thinking, well, you know, dry containers is an asset that's used globally, and it's the one thing that's not really tracked, you know, and it's all over the world. And why is that? So looking at it more closely, I found that container tracking at the container level presents some pretty unique challenges. And that's why I founded Akua, to primarily focus on creating a concept around smart containers. And what we're focusing on is not so much the technology itself. I mean, the technology has to be mature enough, but we're really looking at what I call the standard operating process. Because in a container, with an asset, you kind of know who owns the asset, right? So you're selling into the asset owner will track that asset, and they create return on value from that. The problem with containers is the containers are typically either leased or provided, owned by the ocean carriers. So the actual owners of the contents in the containers that want to be tracked, they don't really have control over those containers, right? So when you start trying to put asset tracking devices on the containers, you run into the challenges of, well, who owns the device, who manages the device, and all that. And then in addition to that, which is actually the most important question comes up, is who actually owns the data, the actual tracking data. And that's where some of the security concerns and the sovereignty of that data comes into play. So those are the primary hard questions that Akua was formed to try to answer. And we've been working on that for the past 7 years. So thank you. Now I turn it over to Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian Walter. I'm the CEO of Netfasa. I'm probably the odd one out here because Netfasa is an Irish company. So we're based on the west coast of Ireland in a place called Dingle, which is probably famous for the fact that it's a very small town of 2,000 to 3,000 people, yet it has 52 bars. So anybody wants to go for a drink or a pub crawl, then Dingle's the place to go. So we founded Netfasa back in 2018, and we had primarily come from the cellular space. So the founder and all the senior members of the management team are either ex-Ericsson, ex-Motorola, or have worked for cellular operators. So we have a lot of experience in the cellular space, and we had identified that IoT was a new and upcoming market, and we thought that we could take our experience and build a specific IoT device and business for the intermodal container. Now, prior to getting there, we dabbled as well in smart agriculture. So we actually have a business unit that is deploying IoT sensors on farms in Ireland to help reduce the amount of fertilizer that's spread on the ground, and you monitor the soil water content, the nitrogen content, and that sort of thing, and you enable through IoT technology the farmers to better manage their land. And then from there, we got involved with Matson here in the US in a port project, which started out with chassis tracking, but then we moved on to actually reefer monitoring. So what we do today for Matson is we provide on-vessel LoRaWAN networks that allow them to continuously monitor the reefers while they're on the vessels going between, say, the West Coast and China. And then looking at that market, we saw the opportunity to develop something using that technology for the dry container. And that's why we're here today to talk about that.
Well, before we jump into talking about smart containers, first of all, the container itself, we heard earlier today about chassis and their role, and the container itself is critical infrastructure. There's approximately, it depends on what statistics you want to look at, but everybody says somewhere between 80 to 95% of goods are moving in containers. And of that, the majority will be the majority of the cargo is moving by container. It's roughly, I don't know, somewhere around 2 billion tons. And about $8 trillion. And if you don't have a container, quite often you can't get your goods moved. You saw that with agricultural products here in the US that were stranded because they couldn't get boxes because there's such an urgency to get them back to China to redeploy. And most of these containers, about 95 to 97%, are made in China. The bulk of those are made by 3 state-owned enterprises. And today, you see that these containers are becoming smart. And we were talking actually before that the technology and the ability to make them smart has been around for quite some time, but it's now actually happening. You have Hapag-Lloyd, who's already deployed or retrofitted about 1 million containers to make them smart. One is out there saying that they're going to make their fleet smart. Drurys is saying you're going to see about up to 30% of the entire global fleet smart within the next 5 years. So let me kick it off to the panel with sort of what actually is a container, smart container? What actually makes it smart? And yeah, why don't we start with Roman, and you can all kibitz in because I'm sure we all have a slightly different take on that.
Great, yeah. From our perspective, overall, a smart container is an Internet of Things device. And what is an Internet of Things device? It's composed of 3 main parts. It senses, it computes, and it communicates. And so the panelists here have indicated some of their specialties, one of which you were talking about, LoRaWAN, wireless communications. For us, we have a sensor platform that senses different components of the container. Temperature, humidity, light, vibration are some of the more common sense modes that we provide, but we also have the ability to obviously locate where things are using GPS, and I think that's generally standard. Overall, that's what I think a smart container does, and I think those are the main components of what a smart container is composed of.
from my perspective, the way that we're defining a smart container is that we're trying to treat the container as in a sense, like an IoT gateway. So the container itself has the electronics built into it that allows it to automatically detect and authenticate sensors like what Allosense is building. So the idea is that you want these sensors to be commodity, right? So you have pallets, equipment, whatever is loaded inside the container might have whatever sensors that's attached to it, like temperature sensors, shock sensors. And anything that's put inside the container will automatically get detected by the smart container gateway. In a sense, like when you turn on your Bluetooth on your phone, it'll detect all the Bluetooth devices that's in the near field of view. And in doing that, it'll then authenticate and connect to whatever sensor is is approved to connect to, and that data will then be collected and sent back to a cloud platform, right? So think of the container itself as being its own gateway device, and that's the kind of architecture that Akua's been focusing on.
So I think I would agree with my colleagues here that a smart container contains all of these functionalities. So primarily the sensor suite, the compute module, the communication device, the GNSS for location. But beyond that, I would say that the other important part of a smart container is the energy harvesting system, because these devices have to be battery autonomous. They have to have a life of 10 plus years, and you can't be going back out to change batteries because, that would just be too expensive. So I think sort of like those are really the key technologies that are going to drive smart container adoption.
What do you guys think? A lot of these elements have been around for a long time. Savvy was exploiting ARFID. Some of these sensor networks have been around. You've worked and pioneered a lot of the telecommunications angles and wireless communication angles. What do you think the hurdles and that have slowed this down, and what do you think is driving the uptake now? And I'll throw that to whoever wants to grab for the question first.
So to me, what my opinion is the biggest barrier to adoption for smart container. There's several things that I've kind of identified. One is what Ian just said. You don't want to have a container that you have to charge with a USB charger like every 2 weeks, right? You want it to be essentially maintenance free. So if you have electronics that's built into the container, you want it to be able to have self-harvesting from the energy perspective. So that could be like solar panels, for example, built into the container. It could be harvesting the motion of the container when it's on an open ocean or going on a rail line or being trailered. And then the other really big hindrance on, I think, is from is a cost perspective, right? You have this steel container that's been around for I don't know how many years, and it's fairly low cost, and it lasts like 10 years. And whenever you try to put electronics, you're adding costs to the container. So that's one of the driving technology challenges, is to try to develop a technology that will last pretty much forever and will be almost no cost. And also, the last one I think that we're always faced with is global connectivity, right? A container will traverse all over the world, and if you have a smart container, you need some sort of network connectivity. So how do you get that connectivity on the open ocean? How do you get that connectivity when the container is sitting in the desert in the Middle East? How do you get that connectivity when a container is being delivered into the jungles, maybe in Southeast Asia, right? So there's a lot of technology coming online, like satellite IoT systems and things like that. So we're keeping track of a lot of these technologies, and really in the end, what you want is communication to be ubiquitous, right? Doesn't matter where you are, you get a high probability of connectivity globally. So.
What we want to do is we want to actually follow into the fundamentals as to why do we want to make this smart? What are the benefits of making a smart container? And one of the benefits is obviously optimizations. So I go back into our experience with the bring up of gigafactories and other manufacturing facilities. And one of the reasons why we put sensors in all these different stations and machines is to do more with less, to make more with less. And so the technology is primarily dictated by those fundamental goals of how do we optimize, how do we track, how do we do more with less, and how do we get the breadth, the sum and the aggregate of data across all these different smart containers and create intelligence from that. And so our approach is, yes, those sensors are commoditized. We have a sensor platform that does what most other sensor platform does, but we take that information, we help to derive some intelligence from it. That's why we have AI enablement of those sensors and of the data that we collect.
So my view on this is it's the data itself. And the reason for that is today you can track containers, but it's indirect tracking. So you're either tracking the vessel via AIS, or when it's in the port, they might have RFID tags on it, or they're using the container ID and OCR technology. So the problem with that, though, is that all of that data is stored in separate silos. And that then makes it very difficult to get actionable insights across the data set. So I think sort of what's driving smart containers is the data itself and having that end-to-end data in one place.
Well, so with all of this data, and where is the value generated? What is the business case that is being solved, and how do you get the return that warrants the extra cost? I'll start that with Ian.
So I think if you look at Hapag-Lloyd and their deployment of 1 million containers, what I've heard there is that what's driving their business case is container utilization. So by having the ability to track the containers in real time, they're able to better utilize their container fleet. And over time, they'll be able to reduce the number of containers they need within the fleet. And that's where they're generating the cost saving. And I think also along with that, there's some talk about in getting better returns or better insurance premiums, but I'm not sure that I really believe that. I think you might be able to generate a business case where you could argue that the insurance company won't put up your premiums because you've got a smart container tracking device, but they're not going to reduce them.
So a few weeks ago, I was talking to what could be considered the largest container owner in the US. And they also brought up container utilization to me. They actually mentioned that out of all of the containers they own, they probably can only account for about 60% of those containers. If you ask them, where are those containers, they're all over the place. They're being used for storage, they're not available for shipping and things like that. So I agree with Ian. One of the direct benefits, they said, if they had a smart container, and then they could do real-time location, is a better utilization of those containers in their container fleet. That's one. I think the other advantage will eventually be the actual beneficial cargo owners, the companies who actually have the cargo in those containers. And that's where things like the sensors that Roman talked about, the data that you can do the analytics on that sensor data, and that's where a lot of the value is going to be done. Whether it's tracking temperature, spoilage, shock, breakage, loss prevention because of tampering, people breaking through the containers looking for patterns like that. So I think it becomes like a big data a problem or advantage in the end. The more data you have, the more analytics you can do on that data. And I think in the end, that's where a lot of the value is going to be, is to the beneficial cargo owners.
I agree with Ian and Neil on the utilization as well. I see something very similar to how we jumpstart a manual production line to a fully automatic production line, where we try to apply automations to some of the sensing components and optimize utilization. And as part of that optimization, we're also able to improve routing, right? So once you have the aggregate data across the locations of all these different smart containers, you can then identify places to optimize and do some route optimizations, therefore reduce costs. And when we're looking at the manufacturing line as well, utilization is certainly of interest. Also, the utilizations of not just the smart container, but also the vehicles, the stations that we use in the factory floor as well. That has some contribution to the cost breakdown. But overall, I do think that having these type of sensors and smart enablement of these containers leads to a reduction of cost and thereby improving your return on investment.
Where do you think these developments are going to go? I mean, there's all kinds of technology out there at the moment. Most people are focused on lat long, right? And the other stuff is coming, but reefers may be a little bit different. There may be greater sensors going on there, but where do you see the technology going, and how do you see it sort of rolling out? Is it all going to be carriers and massive players? Is there a role for the little guy? Where's this going to go? Come on. Can't all be softballs.
So I think it's easy to talk about smart containers. It's a lot harder to see how it gets to large-scale adoption. It's one thing to build a sensor or an IoT gateway in a lab and put it on a couple containers, send it around the world, collect some data. So I don't think, in my opinion, I'm an engineer, so I think the technical challenges can be solved with enough, research, and that part can be solved. I think it's the other stuff that's going to be the challenge. It's the maintenance of these containers, right? Answering the question of who owns the data that's coming off these containers. Just as easily as the container owners can track the container, adversaries can track it too. So now you have, governments questioning, is this data, how easy it is to detect where all these containers are? How do you know if somebody wants to track a container that has certain kind of cargo goods, that they know where to intercept the container on a rail line, for example, to break into it, right? So I think, for us, we are focusing on the technology piece of it, right? But it's some of these other adoption questions that have come up that we're spending more and more time trying to focus on and trying to figure out, how do you get a smart container into kind of a mass adoption?
I think adoption is certainly a concern for us. How we look into and improve adoption is that we are a domestic manufacturer of electronics. Even though we're a startup, we design and assemble and manufacture our own electronics that we deploy either to a factory or to an on-site facility or to the US Department of Defense space for evaluations and pilots. And I think this falls into a potential national security concern. Look, a majority of the electronics that is made for making things smart, including iPhones, is manufactured overseas at a potentially adversarial country. And I think startups and small businesses that help improve the manufacturing domestically and create the sensors, the platform to enable smart capabilities and containers so that that data is preserved within the US and that data can be used by US companies or the US government. I think that's going to be an interesting play, and I see that as being sort of the future of manufacturing smart containers, at least from our lens.
Yeah, I would agree. But I would sort of like expand on it, say that from a security aspect, today anybody can put a smart tag or whatever on a pallet or in a shipment, and while it won't work while it's on the vessel, as soon as that container is offloaded in the port with today's narrowband IoT and LTE Cat-M and LoRaWAN technologies, those devices will be able to communicate from within the container. So there's an argument that if you have a smart device, as Neil said, acting as a gateway, you can better control those devices and where that data goes. So I think there's a huge security aspect here of being able to control all of this data a lot better than you can do today. And then I think also there's going to be a lot of pull from the beneficial cargo owners, because from our company we're getting inquiries from the steamship lines, but also from the beneficial cargo owners as well. There's a lot of interest in them being able to better track their shipments than they can today, because you have to rely on the shipping lines providing that data. And a lot of times that data is delayed by 24 hours. So by the time you get a message to say that your shipment has arrived in the port and left the port, it's probably already on your dock. So, I think there's definitely these drivers here today that are from the shipping line and the beneficial cargo owners that is going to drive the uptake of the smart container.
It's definitely closing in on 5 o'clock. Well, I think we'll use the ominous sign falling as an indication to throw it to the audience for questions. Yes, in the back here.
I think primarily today it is the steamship lines, and as we've seen with Hapag-Lloyd, their announcement of doing 1 million, that's really getting everybody else sitting there looking at thinking, what are they going to do? To a certain extent, though, it does depend on the size of their fleet. We were on a call a couple of weeks ago with Maersk, and they have 10 million containers. So for them, it's a huge cost. So they really have to understand the benefit of deploying and how they're going to actually have a positive business case. From the beneficial cargo owners, I think it depends very much on the value of the cargo. If it's a high value cargo, yes, they really want to know where it is. They want that direct notification coming to them and not via the steamship lines. And we've seen really two models. There's the model where you have the permanent gateway attached to the container, so it's there for the life of the container. And then you have the single trip model, where you're installing the device on the container just for a single trip for a beneficial cargo owner.
Anybody else? Next question? Yes, in the back over here.
You talk a lot about the benefits drivers or being able to track.
Illicit. I don't know. Certainly, we've had some inquiries recently about carriage of lithium-ion batteries. You know, there's a lot of interest in that from the pure car track carriers where there's been fires on vehicle fires, lithium battery fires. But we are also seeing inquiries from the shipping lines related to the same carrying of lithium-ion batteries and, you know, any other hazardous cargo. So on that same call Maersk was on, there was somebody there from Lloyd's, the insurance company, and his suggestion was, well, you know, why don't we just install the smart container device on these hazardous cargo containers, so at least we've got some ability to track and monitor those cargoes outside of anything else.
So, so if you look at a shipping container, I view a shipping container as being extremely vulnerable, right? You go through an airport, right? You try to come into the U.S., you go through body scanners, they scan your carry-on luggage, they scan your checked luggage. I mean, everything gets scanned. Stuff coming in and out of countries on these containers, they do have some scanning technology, but very little is scanned, right? So with smart containers, one of the advantages is you can actually detect when containers are actually open and closed. So we've had a lot of interesting discussions with customs, for example. On some of our customers, for example, the southern border of the U.S., we see a lot of the containers actually getting opened and closed. That's even unknown to the cargo owner, right? They seal their containers at their warehouse, and off it goes across the U.S., the land border. They have no clue if that container is getting open or closed, because as everyone realizes, those little custom seals are easily duplicated, and you can easily pull the container off, cut the seal off, put whatever you want inside those containers, smuggle it across the border, and do the reverse and take it out. And honestly, we actually see a lot of that on these containers. When you have the ability of a smart container, so even beyond beneficial cargo owners, I think there eventually it could be is a large customs, kind of similar to the CT-PAT, where you can give you green lane access across borders. I see something similar could happen with ocean ports and containers, where it's possible that you could get like a green lane type of advantage if you start using smart containers. Because if you start feeding some of that data to the customs, you might be able to bypass some of the container scanning that, it has long lines and things like that. So I see that when you start thinking about it with smart containers, even beyond the ocean liner, the carriers, and the beneficial cargo owners, that the data itself is very, very beneficial to even the government, the customs.
Also to add to that, when tracking for sort of illicit goods, I think there's a sort of a cost breakdown there. We were mentioning about lithium-ion batteries and using the temperature sensor that already exists in a smart container. There's no additional cost to doing that sensing. Or identifying if a smart container has been opened, there are obviously sensing capabilities that's already as part of that smart container that doesn't include an additional cost to detect those illicit goods. So I think overall, if a smart container is expected to track what you were mentioning. I think the company that's purchasing that smart container would certainly try to identify what is the cost breakdown, and if that specific sensor, perhaps not a CT scan, right, but that specific sensor is cheap to implement, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of smart containers that are being deployed that may need to have that sensor. So just wanted to add that commentary based on your question.
Hi, Casey.
I'll go first. So, yeah, I think that's a very good point. So, on the standard side, probably the ones that are driving that the most now is the DCSA, which is basically all of the shipping lines. So they have electronic bill of lading standards. They have other standards for smart IoT. So I think they're going to be driving that. There's also the Container Owners Association, which has a standard which was initially designed for reefer monitoring, so reporting all of the alarms and events coming off reefers, but that's going to be expanded to cover dry containers. So I think really what we do need to be able to share this data. There's no point in having all of these disparate systems not communicating with each other. And then on the blockchain side, there are initiatives out there, excuse me, tied to the SIM cards. So one of those is PairPoint, which is I think it's a joint venture between Vodafone and SoftBank. And what they're looking at doing is basically implementing blockchain protection of the data, along with actually the ability to use events made by the tracking device to essentially execute a payment transfer. So when the container arrives at your depot, the bill could be paid automatically. The example that they use, and it's probably easier to understand, is that if your car has a SIM-enabled device in there, the infotainment system, and it's got your credit card details, it can automatically pay for parking without you having to do anything, and it's all being facilitated by this PairPoint architecture.
So the data standards, that's a tough problem. To put a real standard, global standard together could take forever in one sense. So we've been monitoring it, but one of the things that we have implemented just to have our systems be deployable is we've created a simple REST API to allow different TMS systems or proprietary systems to kind of pull the data they need based on certain attributes. We've also the one group that does actually have a standard is happens to be like the U.S. DoD. So we've worked to be compliant to their data standard, and then there's also the Department of Homeland Security. So we've actually send data to, for example, the risk targeting system that kind of is used to help identify which containers might be targeted for additional inspections. For example, if we see a container coming across and we detect 20 door openings, they may decide, well, maybe we better inspect that container more than one that took the entire trip and it was sealed from the time it left to the time it arrived at the border, for example, right? So we've been working kind of at that level, but to have a true global data standard, in my opinion, that's still quite a bit away because everybody has their opinions on what that should look like and things like that.
Agreed. And there are certainly other standards as well. For us, more common sort of IoT standard is MQTT. There's additional security protocols, TLS, that we deploy. And also the communication is somewhat benchmarked by cellular communications or satellite communications. And you even go as deep as the modulation of what you're sending to. So there's certainly a plethora of security measures and standards across the entire technology stack that is a bit fuzzy in this industry. But what we're doing is we are aligning to the more common standards, and we have the ability to use those common standards or other specific standards that we need to align with.
We have time for, okay, right here.
So I just wanted to maybe present another driver behind this. Not too many, from what I understand, going through the listing of people here from the insurance industry. Well, I'm in risk control, loss mitigation. I work for one of the major insurance companies. And we may be one of the main drivers. Because when we see huge, tremendous amounts of containers being into, chain of custody is everything. Because it's a food product, and you've got $500,000 worth of product. That starts happening over and over again. Smart containers, can't wait for you to develop quickly. We've been driving for technology to actually share. Well, my question to you is, sharing the knowledge, how important it is for security, the control of that data, how is it going to be transferred? My perspective, I'd love it to be transferred to ship's bridge, on a ship, to the rail line, that's actually moving it, or to the terminal, has possession of it for 3 or 4 days, when one of those alarms start going off, they can actually react. But the data is usually going to one person, so is that starting to be addressed on security issues, passing that data, alerts and alarms in real time?
So I'm going to jump in on this one, actually. We have a little bit of experience with the port community system, as I mentioned before. We worked with the DoD, and one of the roles was to disseminate real-time information to selected stakeholders or key stakeholders. So you have first responders who need information. You have customs who needs information. You have the lines who need information. In this particular case, the warfighter needed information. Where's our stuff? So those are all different grades of information, and so different types go to different folks. And in my opinion, the smart container is a generator of information, and at some level, you need a smart port community system to sort of disseminate that information and sort of, where does it go? And at the same time, protect the confidentialities which companies compete on, right? You can't just turn over the customer list to your competitor. So I think that the smart container will wind up working with a smart port, and it will be the combination that really is where you see those sorts of powerful effects.
So I spoke to the insurance community early on, maybe a little dated, maybe about 4 years ago. And what I found is I kind of view it as being kind of chicken and egg. We talked to the insurance community, and they're like, well, Neil, we don't have enough data to have our actuaries actually start looking at the risk reduction and all this. So without all that data, we can't say anything. And I'm like, well, if the insurance companies would go out to the marketplace, say, if we had some insurance benefits from being able to do risk reduction from having some of these smart container technologies, then maybe they would adopt it quicker so you could actually get the data to start doing it. So that was one of the challenges. But personally, we have one experience with one of our customers. They were sending a lot of their containers through the rail line and was going through Chicago. And they noticed that at a certain rail stop in Chicago, every time their containers would get broken into, right? So what did they do? They said, well, we're not going to use that rail line anymore. We're going to move it to a different. So in that way, they actually reduced risk from their part because they had their containers broken in less, because they had the visibility. So I think the cargo owners do have some flexibility in moving controlling their shipments like that. But I think from the insurance standpoint, I would love to have the insurance companies help, with the business case around smart containers. But at least that was my experience like 4 years ago.
To add to that, I think the data rights is going to be owned by the buyer, right, the insurance company. I also think that perhaps this industry is going to experience something similar to what Progressive has done with one of those, I forgot what they're called. You just plug them into your car for a few days, and you drive around and you collect that information. So that kind of action may happen, if not already, where instead of converting all the fleet of containers into smart containers, you do batch processing, and you put one smart container, and then you look at how that performs, and then you progressively increase your throughput of data collection. And overall, going back to your question about data rights and how that's shared, I think that data is going to be owned by the buyer, and then the buyer is going to provide and disseminate that information however he or she wants to do it, whether it's to their suppliers, their vendors, and whatnot, as long as you can make a more intelligent decision around your business case.
So I would expand on that just to say that it's kind of a similar feature that we developed for one of our customers, but it's just for sharing data within the organization. So when a reefer is on a vessel, the data goes to the bridge. When the reefer's in the port, the data goes to the terminal operating system, and somebody has responsibility for it. Because what that customer wanted was that they didn't want, especially when the reefer was on the vessel, for the vessel crew to think, oh, someone's sitting in a knock somewhere, they're monitoring all this, I don't need to do anything. So it was basically forcing the responsibility onto those different groups that they were responsible for that reefer while it was in their jurisdiction. And that's what we called the feature, was jurisdiction. So we can expand that to make it bigger, to say, okay, well, while it's on the vessel, I'm going to send it here. When it's in the port, I can send the data to customs, and at the same time, I can send the data to the beneficial cargo owner.
With that, I think we're all about to turn into pink elephants. So I want to thank you all very much for your attention, and I'm sorry to stand between you and the bar. So with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.